The Senate will come to order. Mr. Carpenter, please call the roll.
Senators Bridges, Cook, Coram, Crowder, Danielson, Donovan, Binberg, Fields, Foote, Gardner, Janal, Gonzalez, Hanson, Hill, Heisey, Holbert, Lee, Lundeen, Marble, Moreno, Pedersen, Briola, Rankin, Rodriguez, Scott, Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Story, Tate, Todd, Williams, Winter, Woodward, Zinzinger. Mr. President.
Here. With 35 present, 0 absent, and 0 excused, we have a quorum. Members, will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of the Journal. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the reading of the Journal of May 26, 2020 be dispensed with and approved as corrected by the Secretary.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senate Services.
Correctly printed, Senate Bill 205, 206, 207, 208, Senate Joint Resolution 19, Senate Memorial 2, Senate Resolution 5, correctly enrolled, Senate Resolution 4.
Second reading of bills, general orders, consent calendar. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the second reading of bills consent calendar lay over until tomorrow, Thursday, May 28th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes having the motion is adopted. The second reading of bills calendar, consent calendar, will be laid over until Thursday, May 28th. Second reading of bills, Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the second reading of bills calendar lay over until tomorrow, Thursday, May 28th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The second reading of bills calendar will be laid over until Thursday, May 28th. Consideration of resolutions. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Resolution 003?
Senate Resolution 3 by Senators Heisey and Zinzinger concerning recognition of Singles Parents Day.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Resolution 3 lay over until tomorrow, Thursday, May 28th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Senate Resolution 003 will be laid over until Thursday, May 28th. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 020?
Senate Joint Resolution 20 by Senators Todd Marble and Representative Monteo concerning the recognition of National Women's History Month and in connection with designating March as Colorado Women's History Month and commemorating the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Joint Resolution 20 lay over until Thursday, May 28th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Senate Joint Resolution 020 will lay over until Thursday, May 28th. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 019?
Senate Joint Resolution 19 by Senators Cook and Janal and Representative Carver concerning declaring the week of May 10th through the 16th, 2020 as Police Week and in connection with declaring May 15th, 2020 as Peace Officers Memorial Day.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Joint Resolution 19 lay over until Thursday, May 28th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Senate Joint Resolution 019 will lay over until Thursday, May 28th. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Resolution 005?
Senate Resolution 5 by Senator Finberg concerning the addition of a Senate rule authorizing the Senate President to promulgate regulations allowing remote participation in Senate legislative proceedings and providing for a safe and healthy work environment during a declared public health disaster emergency.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Resolution 5.
Is there any discussion? Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this Senate Resolution 5 is the resolution regarding remote participation in a health disaster emergency that has been declared by the governor. This is only something that would happen in a declared disaster emergency, just like Joint Rule 44 in our Senate and House Joint Rules only occur or are only allowed in certain circumstances when we have found ourselves in a health disaster. This is the first time that we have found ourselves in that situation since Joint Rule 44 was added to the Joint Rules. Obviously, there was a lot of confusion right when that occurred. Well, confusion around the world, but confusion in this chamber as well about Joint Rule 44 and when and how and what it means. This is a resolution to add a rule for remote participation in a very limited sense for the Senate. The House is doing something very similar. This is something obviously that's been in the press, we've discussed, we've talked about it at Executive Committee. And I know there are different feelings on if we should even be allowing this. And believe me, I've probably run the gamut of all of those feelings over the last 10 weeks or so. I think at this point, we are at a place where this is incredibly unprecedented across the world. 100,000 Americans have died from the coronavirus. This is something I think we need to put our politics aside and just decide what is right in this exact moment. And this is something that will not feel right after this moment, and therefore it won't be allowed to be used. But this resolution is to make it so that all constituents across the state of Colorado have a member here in this unprecedented time fighting for them. And by here, for some folks that are in a more vulnerable class, that should be able to mean being able to participate remotely, just like we all participate in all kinds of meetings and city councils around the country, and even Congress, to an extent, is participating remotely. Again, this is not something that I think will become a norm. This is not something that I think is in the DNA of the Colorado Senate by any means, but it is something that I think we absolutely have to do to take care of our colleagues, our families, and the people of Colorado by ensuring that we are not adding to the crisis. And I think this is a very minimal step we can do that accommodates just a few of our members here in this chamber, while also adhering to the rules and the decorum and being able to do the work that we are all sent here to do over these next couple of weeks. I'm happy to answer questions. There should have also been draft regulations of how this would and could actually go into effect distributed to everybody. But with that, I hope we can all support our colleagues that feel that it is necessary for them and for their families' safety to be able to participate in these next couple of weeks in a slightly different place. Thanks.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. These certainly are challenging and unique times in the Senate. Mr. President, I appreciate your memo yesterday, draft Senate regulations for remote participation in Senate floor proceedings. I am a bit surprised that we are addressing this today. We, I think, have made it clear from our caucus that there is very little to zero support. We see that there is a responsibility for those of us who are elected to represent people to be here in this environment so that the public can see and hear what we have to say. The Executive Committee has certainly discussed this topic for about 2 months. It was a surprise to me to learn that under existing statute that remote participation is not allowed to happen during the session, and that the Executive Committee does not have the authority to promulgate rules to allow this during the session. A few years ago, I believe it was former Representative Willett from the Western Slope who ran a bill, and it passed into law that allows for remote participation during the interim only. And then the executive committee has the authority to promulgate rules for interim time periods, and we're not in one of those. It's my understanding that the minority caucus in the House, that there's little to no support, and I have communicated that there are 16 of us in the Senate minority, and there are 15 folks who think that this is inappropriate. We have talked, through this, and one member, I think, in our caucus has some openness to this. But there's been great debate about should it apply to committees of reference. I adamantly say no. That's when the public, by our Constitution, has the right to come in and have their voice heard. And we have a challenge that the remote testimony sites around the state are either not open or very limited access because they don't want long lines or groups of people congregating there, and maintaining social distancing is a challenge. So we've discussed this, and my view is it absolutely should not involve committees of reference. But there are others who have that view about second and third reading here in the chamber. This goes to a wide variety of rules of, like, the quorum requirement. Do you have to be present to be here, to be counted as present? Because if you are being counted as present and you are somewhere else other than the Capitol, which is designated as the place where we meet, that seems to be problematic. It's also clear to us that times are changing, and the past 2 months have been a learning experience for me. I don't recall ever participating in a Zoom or WebEx call before we adjourned on Saturday, March 14th, I believe it was. But I certainly have now, and I don't miss it. I appreciate being here in the chamber and be able to interact with you colleagues and with you, Mr. President. I think that's an important measure. I think that's an important standard. There's also a question of when we are on third reading, what are we not allowed to do? When we're on third reading, we're not allowed to talk among ourselves, use electronic devices. We're not allowed to receive communication from people who are either paid or volunteer to stand out there outside the glass and communicate with us. What control would there be for someone sitting in their home to make sure that that standard is upheld? I think that would be a real challenge. It is surprising to me, though, that this resolution was introduced just yesterday. We're taking it up today. We are discussing, we're debating, I think, a rule change in this Senate. And I was under the impression, or maybe that was my own fault, that we would delay this and maybe take this up on Friday, but apparently not. Mr. President, I am grateful for your guidance to understand what your vision is for how remote participation would work. I think that you've made it clear that this would not be available to all members upon request. I appreciate that, but I do ask for a no vote on Senate Resolution 5.
Further discussion. Senator Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. I think one thing we can agree on, this is actually about responsibility. And I think that is a term that we're all coming to identify in different ways during this unprecedented time, is how we actually take responsibility. And I walked in the door, as many of you did today, and I answered some basic health questions, and I had my temperature taken, and I got my yellow wristband. It was red yesterday. Yellow today, it'll be different tomorrow. If my temperature read over 100, do I take the responsibility to care for all of you and not put you at risk? Or the responsibility to represent my constituents and actually pass legislation that they think is important? I don't think those two should be set at opposing ideals. When I was elected as a senator, I promise to take responsibility for my constituents, which I've done during this time. I've had 5 town halls, virtually and on the telephone. I've answered hundreds of constituent emails. That's taken responsibility. But as I stand there in the door in the morning with my temperature taken, if it is above 100 degrees, I want to take responsibility to take care of you, to not expose you to something that could harm you or your family. And I also take responsibility for my constituents, for the thousands of Coloradans that elected me, the ones that email me, the ones that are in pain right now that we're going to pass legislation to help. And to take responsibility both to care for you and to care for my constituents should not be at odds. And that is why I strongly support this resolution, so we can stand firm and take responsibility both in our role as senator and in our role of caring for one another.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, good to see you again. Missed you. Many of you, we've had the opportunity to participate on the various remote interactive services. It's been good seeing you. It's nice being in your presence. There is a difference. Safety in the building, safety for all members. I think we need to take it very, very seriously. I have been saying over and over again to people, to some of the folks in my base who don't sense the concern, don't sense the threat of the virus that I believe we all should. I have been saying, you know what? It's not necessarily about you. It's not necessarily about me. It's about the other people and their circumstance, which may be health compromised. It's about what they perceive. I think we need to respect other people's feelings and sensations as well as the facts of their life. So I encourage people to consider first understanding the other person before you seek to be understood. And I'm trying to do that in the course of this conversation. I believe that there is a tension in what is happening here between seeking out safety in the building, safety for members, and the idea of equal representation for all of the people of Colorado. Now, I would take you all, and if I could do informal votes, I don't believe I'll necessarily get participation, but I'd say, how many have participated in Zoom calls? Probably everybody's hand goes up. How many have participated in WebEx calls? Hands go up. How many have participated in GoToMeeting calls? Hands go up. FaceTime, Google Hangouts. The answer is we all have participated in those. But the telling question is this: was it the same as being in the room with the person that you are seeking first to understand and then seeking to be understood by? The answer is no. Honestly, candidly, truthfully, it is not the same experience. We need to be attentive to the reality of the circumstance. Now, what we're talking about right now is something that's very different than has ever happened before. We're saying let's suspend the rules to create a rule. Now, we get to the end of the session, and routinely we get within 3 days and we say, you know what, things are moving fast and furious, we're going to suspend the rules. We're going to take a step back from that which we've all agreed upon, because we all agree that things are a little bit hurly-burly, and we're going to just back away from those a little bit and make things flow a little more smoothly. In this particular instance, the only acknowledgement and responsibility in this resolution that you're considering is that the minority party, who represents the entire state of Colorado, I would argue, in meaningful ways, but certainly a plurality of the voters of Colorado, a substantial plurality of the voters of Colorado, the only responsibility to the minority party is consultation. Now, I will tell you, based on my experience as a member of the minority party, over the past more than 2 months as we have dealt with this crisis of coronavirus and COVID. Yes, I believe it is a crisis. But as we have dealt with this crisis, my experience in being in the minority party and what consultation felt like was, oops, the press release just went out, we wanted to let you know. A substantial plurality of the people of Colorado's perspective may not have been involved in that press release that just went out, but we wanted to let you know. Consultation, as this particular resolution calls for, is not adequate to what we're trying to deal with here, because there is a tension, this tension between safety in the building and equal representation of all the people of Colorado. Now, I believe strongly, and my primary objection to this is in the sanctity of the third reading vote. I'm a little bit concerned that advocates who have a perspective are afraid to come to this building and let their voice be heard. Spring allergies, folks. Don't panic. It's just spring allergies. I am a little bit concerned that advocates who would like to have their voice be heard are afraid to come to this building, and providing remote testimony might relieve some pressure on that matter, but at the same time, sorry, my mask keeps slipping down on me here. I could go full balaclava and then it would stay up, but that's a little bit too intimidating, so I'm not going to do that. So this idea of remote testimony has some challenges. I have some concerns with that, but my primary concern is the sanctity of the third reading vote. You all have experienced it. We sit in our chairs in a cloistered way, protected from influence, not undue influence, influence of any form as we take that third reading vote. Why is that so important? It's so important because we have this cacophonous debate that goes on first reading and sometimes on second reading. And we are seeking to come together on behalf of the people of Colorado into a binary decision, yes or no, on behalf of the people of Colorado. And we have a grand tradition of making sure that moment of truth is taken in a way that cannot be perceived by anyone to be influenced in any way, and certainly not unduly. What certainty do we have, should we be taking third reading votes from remote locations across the state, that there isn't influence, a protest going on in the neighborhood, a protest perhaps going on in the home, that affects in some way that third reading vote? That, my friends, my colleagues, is part of the tension. And it's not about me and whether my temperature was up. I was running cool this morning. 97.8, they said as I came in the building. If I'm 100.4, I need to step out for the day or two until I heal. We're talking not about an individual legislator here. We're talking about the process for everyone. That raises it to a significant and different level than just if it were an individual. So, colleagues, for these reasons, primarily this idea that we are suspending a rule to create a rule that may or may not have had broad participation in the creation thereof, and this idea that we are opening ourselves and our process and our grand tradition to risks that we have fought to protect against previously, that cause me, even though my heart does go out, my concerns are with, and I spoke with a member of the body, a colleague who does have potentially a greater health risk than many of us do. And I spoke with that individual to say, look, I really want you to know this is not personal. This is about process and the tradition, and there is a tension that we need to be attentive to. But as we deal with this tension for safety in the building and equal representation for all the people of Colorado, I urge you to come down on the side of, you know, we need to fight through as the representatives of the people. We need to do what it is we need to do to make sure it happens, that all the people are equally represented. Not some who are represented by someone who is phoning it in. I do not mean that pejoratively, even though it may sound that way. The reality is who is digitally connected versus some who are in the building, who are present and able to represent in the way that we all know goes on. This is an eyeball to eyeball, breath through mask to breath through mask business in this particular circumstance. So I urge you to consider that carefully as you consider your vote on this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to make my comments.
Further discussion. Sarah Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I normally have some difficulty being heard at the mic without a mask, so I'll have to speak a little louder than usual with a mask. The point being that even when here, even when present on the floor, but behind this mask, the interaction between and among us and, in better times, those who represent the citizens and associations and other entities of Colorado depend upon the personal interaction. These are extraordinary times, and I recognize that. My friend and colleague from Monument did a masterful job in discussing the various concerns of individuals, and I am mindful of those. I have been the wag who has said for some 12 sessions here that I was waiting to have that holographic participation option like the Imperial Senate did. But I was being facetious. But here it is upon us. My objection to the remote participation is that the very nature of what we do requires personal presence. Now, you say, there's tremendous risk. The senator from Westminster spoke to this. But you know, members, that's very personal to all of us. A few of us are older than many of you, and we may theoretically be at greater risk. But I have to tell you, I took an oath to represent my constituents, to do so to the best of my ability. And people say, well, you shouldn't have to risk your life. Well, I got news for you. I never took an oath, and I've taken several. I never took an oath that I didn't realize and recognize each and every time that oath entailed risk. it entailed risk to my own personal safety, and maybe that would never occur. You know, when people join the military, it's an entry, and they take an oath. It's an interesting thing. Some people get sent to Decatur, Illinois, and some people get sent to Hanoi involuntarily. Those of you who take oaths ought to consider that carefully, because it turns out that in the year 2020, your legislative oath entails some risk. Oh, but there's risk to my family. I understand that. None of the other oaths I took was without risk to my family, to their well-being, to their economic survival, to not having me anywhere near. There was risk. So I am somewhat amazed. And as I say, and I say this with respect, these things are personal, but I am somewhat amazed that there are those who are in perfectly good health who are unwilling to encounter the risk of being present here. You say, well, personal presence is not necessary. Well, maybe we're going to enter a new era and it won't be necessary. Maybe we'll have holographic representatives here and I can just stay home. You know, I looked at the proposed regulations that would go with this remote participation, and given my age, which I don't think is too old, but apparently it is of an age that I'm in a increased risk category. Perhaps I too, in remote participation, can ask that I participate remotely. Now, before you all cheer, Mr. President, I speak on a momentous topic, and I hope I have the attention of the chamber. The fact of the matter is, the remote participation means that I can go ahead and request this, and I challenge you to deny me because I am at advanced risk category. But I think I'll be safer in Cabo San Lucas. And I think I can go ahead and rent a condo down there and participate in the Colorado State Senate from there, and I can bob it from there. And I was about to say, before there was some distraction over here, before you cheer at the idea of my remote participation, the way I read the rules, you can bob it from anywhere. I suspect it's not as effective. I suspect people would walk out of the chamber just the same. But try to wrap your head around that. Try to wrap your head around a senatorial 5 over here. I can wrap my head around standing 6 feet apart. I don't know how one effectively represents one's constituents when that discussion over there happens, and we know that things happen over there that matter about how we proceed. I respect everyone who has an issue at this time and at this place. And I've often wondered over my 12 years, I've seen various things happen. I've seen people have to be away for illnesses, unanticipated and life-threatening illnesses, and allowances have been made and they have been excused, and I think that's a very personal decision. But to tell everyone in this chamber, you can participate remotely, and I would challenge anyone to say once the rules become the rules, and the question really is not whether you're immediately ill, but whether or not you feel to have some risk. How anyone will be denied remote participation. So, will somebody have to be in the chair? Can you form a quorum of one member of the majority and the chair and 34 other people gone? I mean, that's what the regulations permit. What will it mean to have a call of the Senate when I can sit in Cabo San Lucas and go, here, here. A colleague said, what does it mean to have a call of the Senate? I guess I can retreat to wherever I feel safer in this pandemic. It won't be New York, but retreat to wherever I feel safer and just wave my hand from there. So much for Frank getting a road trip to come and get me at my expense. The call of the Senate will be meaningless. Members, this is not absolutely required, and your service is not without some risk. It never has been. I mean, some of you braved the snow many days to get here, and that entails some risk. You might even have to attend in the most severe snowstorm of the decade or the century. Okay. It's been done. How can a legislature, an assembly, function by remote participation? You know, when this topic was raised, I asked our legislative legal services staff to take a look at the Constitution and tell me if there was anything there that prohibited remote participation. I already knew what the answer was going to be, quite frankly, but I didn't trust my simple country lawyer judgment. I wanted the judgment of our legal staff. And the answer is there's really nothing there that does. Of course, the reason there's nothing there that does prohibit remote participation is because our predecessors and forebears walked, rode mules, drove Model A's, took trains to be here. From far corners of the state, risked traveling, riskier than the Gap, which is risky on a good day, except not now because we've managed to kill the economy and there's no cars in the Gap much. It's one way to solve the transportation problem. Mr. President, colleagues, people of Colorado, your legislators took an oath, and some think that oath can be discharged from the remote location wherever, unspecified, mind you, unspecified, can constitute a quorum in some way without people physically present, that's not what my constituents contemplated when they elected me. That's not what I contemplated when I took an oath. I did contemplate some risk, economic and physical, that went with my service because that's what an oath is about. And quite frankly, members, if I reach a point when I cannot discharge my oath, then it is my responsibility to let someone else take my seat and do so. There may be a time when I cannot encounter the risk. I'm unable to encounter the risk, and I'm unable on a consistent basis to be here. And if that is the case, it is my duty under that oath, quite frankly, in my view, to surrender my seat to someone who can represent my constituents and do so effectively and consistently with the expectations of what it means to be a member of an assembly. Members, I urge a no vote. This is a vote of conscience. This is a vote of obligation. This is a vote of responsibility in the way that each and every one of us conceive of it. I respect those of you who conceive of it differently. But how each of us conceive of our obligation, fulfill our oath, goes more to the core of who we are and what we are willing to do and what we owe our constituents than any political party identification. Members, it is wrong, in my view, to adopt a rule for remote participation. It is wrong, it is unnecessary. I ask for a no vote.
Further discussion. Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. I was really hoping that we wouldn't get to this point. And I was very confident that when the leaders of both parties get together and talk about how we get the state's work done, that our voices would be heard on the most important of these topics. Now, I haven't been here 10 years or 12 years or 16 years like some of you. But here's what I do know in the time that I have been here, is that especially from the perspective of a minority member, being able to have one-on-one conversations with my colleagues on important bills happens right here in this chamber. And almost to a person, I have had extremely constructive and meaningful conversations about these bills. Amendments have been discussed. Some have been rejected, but lots have been accepted. And better laws were made because we were able, as professionals, as colleagues, as elected officials, to have these conversations. Right here. If I need to speak with a member, I've just gone over to the back and said, Senator, do you have 2 minutes? I want to talk to you about one thing on your bill. Would you be okay if we changed this word to this word? Would you be okay if we struck this sentence? Would you be okay if we did this? Would you be okay with that? And sometimes the answer was no. No, Senator Small, we think that's an idiotic idea. No, we're definitely not going to do that. Or, you know what, I hadn't thought about that. That's actually a really good idea. Why don't we go ahead and do that? And do you want to draft it up or do you want me to draft it up? And then let's have another conversation about it. And what I'd ask my colleagues, especially in the majority, were those conversations meaningful to you? Or was I simply just bloviating and wasting your time when we had conversations over by the bench? Was it just a waste of time? Were those worthless conversations? And if they weren't totally worthless, how am I going to have that conversation with you going forward if you're remote? How am I going to speak with you when you're presenting a bill and I've got an idea that might make a law better? And we've got an amendment or an amendment to an amendment or something that we talked about in committee. And hey, why don't we do that on seconds instead of handling it here at 1 a.m. in a committee meeting? How are we going to have those conversations? How am I going to introduce amendments? When you want to introduce an amendment and I've got an idea to it, how are we going to have the conversation? How are we going to take a senatorial 5 and do this? More than maybe anybody else in the chamber, I'm sympathetic to people who are scared of COVID-19. Because you should be. It's not really very fun. And it can be fatal. We all know that. But coming up with ideas to circumvent the risk that shut down the minority party completely, colleagues, that's not the right way to do it. We can't have our cake and eat it too. We can't avoid all risk of COVID-19 and make good legislation. Not in my experience, we can't. And if this place is so deadly and so toxic, why are we here? Why is our governor opening up parts of the state? Why are our counties going to the public health departments that they work with, getting appeals from our state's public health department, and opening up things like churches or restaurants or essential businesses in the first place? If they all can go to work
If Republican counties, for example, have gone to left-leaning health departments and they've agreed on something, and they've gone to perhaps a Democrat-appointed public health department at the state and got approval to do things, I would call that pretty bipartisan. And once that's happened, and as a state we've said it's okay to do these things, shouldn't we be able to do them here? I was on the subcommittee to create things like this partition, to create things like these socks, to create the reasons why some of us are sitting in the most uncomfortable seats I've ever sat in my entire life. Okay? And if this isn't good enough, then just let me know, and we'll make another recommendation, and we can sit up in the galleries. But don't take away my ability to have a conversation with you. It's not fair, and it's not right. And for my constituents, it's not fair, and it's not right. That I can't have a conversation with you, that we can't make good legislation better. I only have one vote, sadly. I just get to sit and be a spectator and watch this all happen, watch this all go by. I don't get to participate. I don't get to do the things I was elected to do. If you're off someplace else and I can't have a conversation with you. And you're adults and you're elected officials and you don't need any scolding from anybody, certainly not from me. So I'm not scolding, I'm begging. Let me do my job. Let my constituents be heard. Please don't do this. Please vote no.
Further discussion. Senator Woodward.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I think that this vote is reflective of what we've seen in the last 8 to 10 weeks. This body is impotent. We have given all power to the governor. He spends our money. He passes laws. He decides what laws to enforce. He decides which laws to ignore. So why do we even be here? Let's go home. Let's all of us just do remote testimony. Let's continue to collect our paychecks. Let's continue to get our insurance. Let the little people who are working at our grocery stores, our restaurants, driving truck at hotels, hospitals, let them go to work. Let them take risk. We're important. We are better than them, so it should not be up to us to take any risk at all for our families. So let's just disband this charade. Let's close down this Capitol, let the governor make all the decisions. That's what's been happening the last 10 weeks. This may be the best idea I've heard. Let's shut it down, save the money, and our colleagues, we can just let Governor Polis make all the decisions for us.
Senator Quorum.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's nice to see you all. I even recognized most of you with your masks on. So do not do anything criminal because I will identify you. You know, I'm a guy that's in that high-risk group. I'm 72. I have a pacemaker. I have a wife with compromised health conditions. But I also understand those who choose not to be here, and I totally understand that. Frankly, I was very disappointed in January when my good friend, Senator Court, resigned because of health conditions. Had we known her recovery was going to be so fast, with all due respect to her replacement, she could have run it, we could have set it out. If this would have happened to her in March rather than January, she would probably have recovered enough to be here. That's a different story. My question that I have and to you is, the most emails I get from the person who has lost their job, who cannot get their unemployment, from the county commissioner who has said, My county's getting shafted. Where are you to help me get my fair share? That's the question that I'm asked. Where are you when I needed you? And frankly, I'm damn sick and tired of Zoom. Talking to one of my colleagues yesterday, said, you know, it's amazing. A Zoom call takes an hour. When you're face to face, it can be done in 5 minutes. So I do think that we do have a responsibility to be here. We need to remain vigilant. We need to be safe. But we also have to think about what previous generations did. I was just reading in 1918, 50 million people, a third of the population of the world, had H1N1. 50 million deaths. I ran my numbers in my county, my district. 99.99% do not have COVID. 99.8% of those who get COVID have recovered. So frankly, you know, if you are in a health situation that you are compromised, absolutely, you should not be here. You should not take that risk. But those of us in the room that are in health conditions, I think should be here. I feel I am obligated to be here. My constituents elected me to represent them. And I don't know about the rest of you, but the last 10 weeks has been the most work I've done probably in the last 10 years. It is every day. It is 10, 12, 14-hour days. I remember the first week of this happening, at 11 o'clock, my wife said, it's rude to be calling at this time of day. Don't do it. But we have an obligation to represent the people who sent us here. And I'm not sure that you can really do that on a Zoom screen. I don't think you can do that. You can't do it by email. You need to be face to face, to look in the eye and say, this is what I believe, and this is why I think we should do this. And yes, it is a risk. But we have minimized our risks here so greatly that, you know, I grew up in a stockyard. I didn't wear a mask. I've never had the flu. So my immune system is pretty strong. But we need to stay strong. I choose to live in faith rather than fear. I will be here. I will take all my precautions, and I will trust in God that He protects you and I. Ask our noble.
Senator Tate, followed by Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm kind of a cup is half full kind of person. So if you look at the pandemic data here in Colorado, new hospitalizations have trickled down to almost nothing. We may likely be close to being out of the woods, which when you look at the data, of course, makes you reflect back on what we were doing on March 10th when things were objectively much worse. So thinking about this, and if this body does pass this resolution, I just hope we don't necessarily need to use it. Some other factors, and this is actually a genuine question, is I've not really understood the last 2 days, like this communication of this great rush. If the level of risk we're at today, which is lower than it was when we adjourned in March, is still too high, why don't we wait a few more weeks? I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to know. Anyways, thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. I rise to speak in support of Senate Resolution 5. But I'd also like to broadly talk about how we got here and also refer to the Senate regulations for remote participation in Senate floor proceedings, a draft document that we got on our desk. Because they do go hand in hand, of course. If we adopt the resolution directs the president to propose policies that we would follow if we adopted this resolution. And I would particularly highlight some aspects of the draft proposal. 1.2 gives us 3 examples for approval for criteria for remote participation. It says if a senator is in an increased risk group, a senator who has a household who is in an increased risk group that they'll return to every evening. Perhaps the senator is exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19 or has been quarantined. These are not flippant reasons to not be on the Senate floor. These are serious health consequences and personal choices. It's not, I want to take a vacation. It's not, I want to sleep in. It's not, I want to wear pajamas instead of putting on a dress. It's not, I don't feel like wearing heels and I'd rather wear slippers and drink hot chocolate. I mean, these are consequential reasons for not being in this chamber. And I don't think there is anyone who goes through the process of running for office, knocking doors, having things said about you that are hurtful, asking for money, being anxious on election night that if you'll be victorious. I don't think anyone goes through that process with ideally having in the back of their mind, man, I hope there's a reason that one day I don't have to go into the office and work. Man, I hope something happens that there'll be an opportunity for me to be able to participate remotely from home instead of going to the chamber and doing hard work. You guys know I love this chamber. I think that is one of my most often repeated refrains when I come up to this mic. We do wonderful stuff here. We do hard stuff here. I love seeing you guys. I like nearly all of you. We disagree, we argue. My colleagues from this side push me to think about things differently. They change my mind, they make my arguments stronger. My colleagues from this side push me to think differently. They change my mind, they make my arguments stronger. And yeah, I love doing that face to face. I love harassing the senator from Grand Junction. It's one of my favorite hobbies, and I'll miss it dearly. I love sidebar conversations. I love hearing people's different thoughts of how they perceived the words on the paper. I love that someone who runs a small business reads a law differently than I do. I love someone that represents a community of color reads a bill differently than I do. I love the work we do in this chamber. It's special, it's an honor, and it's a unique experience. And there are very few things that I would trade it for. And I think the discussions today reveal how much we do have in common. We're all talking about how much our face-to-face communication and work together matters. We're highlighting the importance of our sidebar conversations, our casual hallway interactions. But I also find it frustrating that there's an element of impugning a colleague's motives of how they think they should best represent their people because they might want to be afforded the opportunity to serve their constituents from a different location. if someone is making that choice because they think it means their own health or the health of the people that they hold most dear, I don't think we should suggest that perhaps they're not taking this as seriously or that they won't be able to put in the sacrifice and the time to do it as well. I also think to suggest that someone might quickly drive to Santa Fe or San Francisco and serve out the next 3 weeks of their time in a pseudo vacation just because they can call in via video and participate remotely also impugns the motives of our colleagues and suggests that they don't take this work seriously. I don't think that's likely because I trust each and every one of you that you would not take advantage of this situation and that you would only use it in the most serious and dire circumstances after long and serious consideration. This job has risks, absolutely. I don't think anyone in here has been immune from the horrible experience of having a death threat land in your email box, be verbally accosted in a town hall. And we know the stories from other parts of this nation of what it means in turbulent times to be a public figure who exists in public spaces. But this is a modest proposal. If you look at the resolution and you look at the draft rules, this isn't a free-for-all. This puts restrictions and guidelines around how participation will look. It includes both sides of the aisle, requires a notice. It requires confirmation of those votes. It restricts certain actions. For example, a senator participating remotely couldn't do a call of the Senate. So yes, this job comes with risks, but in this unprecedented time, and I'm afraid I'm going to overuse that word in the next 3 weeks, but in this unprecedented time, if we as a body could figure out how to let people represent their constituents while still being able to make a difficult decision of doing that remotely, I don't know why we wouldn't proceed with that. You don't have to. You don't have to. If you feel like you need to do your best work for your folks by being in this building, then I will see you tomorrow. But if you aren't blessed with having a healthy family, or perhaps you aren't blessed with having an immune system that's just raring to go, if you aren't blessed with having a family member who you could possibly kill by being in this room, then can't we have the grace to let those people have a different option to exercise their duty of representing the people who elected them, and for that matter, the people that didn't elect them? I've served in the minority. We commiserate over this a lot. I would say, maybe perhaps I didn't enjoy every day of being in the minority, but I certainly appreciate that experience. And so I guess I would say I apologize if you guys felt that this came out of left field. I'm sorry. There's almost nothing worse than being in the minority than feeling like things are being done to you than with you. But Perhaps you'll believe me, perhaps you won't. But the conversations that we've been having over this topic over the past weeks are reflected in these documents. They aren't the brainchild of one member of the Democratic Party, of the majority party, sitting in office and scribbling down how we should do it. I've found the conversations with my colleagues in the minority party helpful and instructive. And while, as we all know, you hardly ever get everything you want, I do hope you see your handiwork in the resolution and in the draft rules. That might not get you to support it. In fact, I doubt it will. But I hope it does give you some confidence that these rules and the resolution, and the draft regulations are reflective of your input and concerns. Over the past weeks, I've sent out a dozen newsletters, maybe. I think I've had over a dozen events trying to respond and address the concerns of my district. They're mostly therapy sessions, right? You're mostly trying to respond to people in full panic and concern about what tomorrow holds and what 2 months from now holds. Another thing that I will apologize now, because I will say it often over the next 3 weeks, my district was destroyed by this and will only continue to suffer the consequences of this. So I'm anxious to get back here. I'm anxious, like one of my colleagues just said from the Western Slope, to get to work, to see what we can do together, to see what solutions we can come up with, to find out what great idea comes from the hallway conversation, to figure out what next steps we do because we were joking about something else and then suddenly happened into a great idea for a great amendment. I can't wait to talk about what our interim committees could address. I can't wait to start grappling with what next year's challenges hold. I actually look forward to the really tough conversations we're going to have about the budget because you guys teach me and help me. But I'm able to be here. And I respect each of you so much and the decisions that you make that I feel confident that voting for the ability for some of my colleagues to participate remotely is the right thing to do. I know you guys. I trust you. And if you think that the best decision for you is to vote from home, then I'm going to trust that decision. And I'm going to vote today to enable you to make that decision. So I ask for an aye vote on Senate Resolution 5.
Senator Cook.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition of this. Last week I was reading an article about the Hong Kong flu that hit in 68 and 69. Killed over 100,000 Americans, killed up to 2 to 4 million people worldwide. It mostly affected people over 65 years old. And I'm reading this article and I can say, wow, we could substitute Hong Kong flu for COVID-19 in here. Because it's the exact same criteria that we had for the Hong Kong flu that we have now for COVID-19. And I'm pretty sure oh, you know what they did though? It was kind of interesting. Back in 68, 69, they didn't go run and hide. They kept the economy going. You know what they did? They went and had Woodstock. times have changed, I guess. We're now afraid of just about everything. You know, and can't help but think that our responsibility is here in this chamber. You know, there's going to be other people here. The staff is going to be working. The sergeants are going to be working. Our aides are going to be working here in the building. OLS, they're all going to be here. And what are we saying? That the risk is great for us? We are too scared and we can't be here? But our staff can be here. The Senate staff can be here. OLS, well, their risk isn't as great as ours. We're more important because we're senators. So we don't need to be in this building. You know, I find it kind of funny. Today we have all 35. We have 19 here. We have 16 here. All 35. Can't help but think, why is that? Oh, it's probably for this vote. We're going to have all 19, all 16 here for this vote. So if we can all be here for this vote, why can't we all be here for every vote? You know, I was looking at the criteria for the remote participation. The only one that makes sense is number C. Because the other two says if you're over 65, you don't have to be here. Now I'm looking at both sides. We both have members that are over 65. But yet, everyone over 65 was able to make it here today. Again, why can't everyone make it for all the other votes? The only one that makes sense, again, is number C, which says the senator is exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19 or is quarantined for possible exposure to an individual who has tested positive. Now that one kind of makes sense. Like I said, the other two, just because you're over 65, doesn't make sense. Senator from Montrose, you know, he's 72, and he's going to be here. He's committed. The other issue I have with this, and I'm not impugning anybody's motives, and I'm not saying anybody's going to go to Santa Fe or San Francisco, but there is potential for abuse in here. It talks about, you know, you have to kind of stay in communication on the camera, but you can leave the camera occasionally. No, does that mean I can go to the zoo with my kids? Who knows? There's nothing in here that says you must remain home. Just you have to be in communication. And it doesn't even talk about you have to be in communication on a computer so people can see where you're at. You can do it by phone, unless the president has approved an alternative method. That could be a phone conversation. So, hey, I'm going to go to the grocery store, I'm going to go to Walmart, Costco, wherever. I'm going to go to the zoo with my kids. This is potential for abuse. We need to be here. It is our responsibility to be here and to do the people's work. So I'd ask for a no vote on this.
Further discussion. Senator Marble.
Thank you so very much, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. I rise in opposition to this resolution, and I wish I could say that I wasn't in one of those categories that is supposed to maybe take extra precautions, but I am. I'm over 65, and I do have health concerns and health issues, and that's why I can't wear a mask. It's impossible unless I want to jeopardize my health in other ways. And two, I wish this resolution was the first item coming out of left field during the last 10 weeks, but unfortunately it's not. It's just one of many. I rise in opposition to this resolution because I know what it is to be an elected official. To be an elected representative of the people means making sacrifices, huge sacrifices, for each and every one of those people we represent. It's unfortunate, under the last 10 weeks, I feel our representative government has been shoved to the wayside, And we live more under a dictatorship, but it's all for the safety of people. So we let it go. Some people do, some people don't. What does it mean to be an elected representative of the people? It means communication. It means access. And it means being easily found whenever necessary, because you are that representative. You are that voice. We haven't had a voice over here for the last 10 weeks. And a lot of people have not had a voice, but they've been dictated what they can and can't do. What's really funny is all the precautions we see around here that have been taken, greater than anywhere else in the state, greater than Walmart, believe it or not. Greater than the gas stations. And I swear the people who work here and do the maintenance do one of the best jobs I've ever seen. All these precautions, all the masks, all the spacing at the desks, all of these plexiglass partitions. For perception, so we can all feel safe, but we all really know it really doesn't help. So we need to go home and be remotely addressing who we represent. Who are you kidding? Honestly, who are you kidding? We need to be here. We need access, immediate access, because we are in a time, supposedly, where we have shut down people's businesses for life. They have risked everything to have a business, and we just said because of a virus, these people are going to lose everything. But you can be home and remotely participate, and you're going to get paid, and you're going to have everything. You aren't going to suffer at all. You need to be here. If you are that afraid, maybe you should think about getting somebody here who's not and who can show up. If you have a 100-degree temperature during session, you call in, you get an excuse, and you stay home. You don't remotely participate. You stay home. If you have a broken leg, you stay home until you can walk and get here. You don't remotely participate. I feel safer here than I feel anywhere. And you know what? I go to Walmart. And you know what? I don't wipe down that cart every time I take it out. I put my hands on, shove it through, and I'm going shoulder to shoulder with people in the aisles, even though Walmart has taken precautions to say you go this way down that aisle and that way down that aisle. People just aren't ready to accept that. What's really been hard is that we think that we're, I look at what we here we look at we're something so special that we can stay home. But then all our maintenance people, they have to be here and work, and they're emptying the trash, and they're going home to their loved ones, but they don't matter. If one person is that worried, then we all should be home. And you know what? That's never going to happen, because we're always going to have viruses. We're always going to have sickness. We're always going to have something in life that we can be afraid of if we choose. I will be here with the maintenance workers. I will be here with the highway patrol. And I will be here with you. We need to respect the people we represent. not hide from them. Because, even though we have bureaucracies and unelected officials telling our businesses how they can open, and then, saying to them, we'll revoke your license if you don't adhere to our rules. And those rules that they force upon these businesses, they are making the businesses now the enforcer. Government's already made businesses the tax collector. Oh, heck, let's just go make them the enforcer of all of our rules, too. Do you know what a precedent that sets up between a business and the people who come there, their customers? Customers they're trying to keep and hang on to? Making business people the enforcers of laws that they're hiding behind in their offices away from. Oh, we'll just make the businesses do this. We'll make them do everything else. How unfair are we? And then we're going to stay home and hide and not let those people have access to us because we're afraid. I have family too. And I have friends. And a family member who almost died of COVID on a respirator, ventilator for 3 weeks. She's 70 years old. She got it here in Denver. She got out of the hospital finally after 5 weeks. 2 weeks later, guess what? She's at the family Memorial Day picnic with the rest of the family, bringing beans and salad. You can't keep that gal down. And she had every reason to be one of those people to lock herself up and never see anybody again. But I'm not going to live my life like that. Nobody in my family is going to live our lives like that. We do take our precautions, but we do accept our own personal responsibility. But I am going to say that that access for the laws that we pass is primary to why we need to be here, to hear from those people that we have discarded. And they have no voice, have had no voice for 10 weeks, and they aren't going to have it anymore or be able to have access to their representative and let them know of the destruction that has happened in their lives, not by a virus, but by government itself and the bureaucracies. You give them access and you be here. I cannot be more serious about making us available to answer to the public for what we have done. Be here.
Senator Sonnenberg. Senator Sonnenberg is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, we talked about, or those several have talked about the numbers that have driven us to fear to where we are at today. And I don't want to rehash those numbers. I don't want to rehash how we have cowered in our basements to get to this position. But what I do want to talk about is the actual resolution itself. With all due respect to my good friend and the president of this esteemed chamber, starting in line 7, it says this rule authorizes the president to promulgate regulations That should scare us. Nothing against the president, but we are an elected body. The president should have no more authority to do those rules than we as a chamber to vote on those rules. And then let's go back on page 3, line 24. It says, any regulations that the president may promulgate pursuant to the subsection A of this rule supersede any provisions, and I'm paraphrasing now, that may be interpreted some other way. I have great respect for our president of this chamber. But we already have somebody in this building pretending to be a king. We don't need one in the Senate to be doing the same thing. That's what this resolution does. Members, we are better than this. We don't need to be cowering in our basement. We need to do our job, and we do our job right here. In this humbling room with each and every one of us able to have a conversation and a discussion on how this impacts our constituents. Members, I'm going to ask you to vote no to continuing to cower in our basement.
With all due respect to the good senator from Sterling, it is never appropriate to refer to the good president as a comparable of that of the first floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. It's nice to see you today. I rise in support of the resolution, and I just wanted to draw attention to a couple of things that have not been mentioned yet. This virus is extraordinarily different from anything the planet has ever seen. And part of that is because of the asymptomatic nature of people carrying the disease. You may appear to be healthy, you may feel fine, but you could put the health of your family in jeopardy. You could be carrying the disease unknowingly. As you know, we're taking precautions to keep each other safe. That's been mentioned by many. Social distancing, for example. Some of us are up here to preserve the social distancing on the floor. Wearing a mask. This mask doesn't protect me. This mask protects you. Everyone here that's taking care of each other is doing the right thing. If we chose to change the rules to allow for remote participation, we are allowing for people who need to represent the people in their districts to do their jobs. What I'm hearing from my constituents are people in need. They've been impacted by the virus, and we have a job to do. They want us to get in here, get the work done in an efficient manner. And if someone gets quarantined, they won't be able to come here and do that. So by not passing the rules, we would be disenfranchising those constituents. But the last thing I wanted to draw attention to is that we would be joining the ranks of other prestigious institutions that have chosen to allow remote participation. The US Supreme Court, Congress, and city councils all across the state of Colorado are convening remotely, allowing for participation from the public and the representatives in that institution. We would be joining the ranks. This is fairly commonplace now in a time that requires extreme caution in order to protect one another. It's a sense, an obligation to one another, a responsibility to protect our communities. So I urge an aye vote on this resolution. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I suppose we have seen how unique these times are, in that I think for the first time in my experience in the Senate, a member was recognized and spoke who was not standing here in the well, which is another curiosity of this current time. Mr. President, I do want to thank you and the good senator from Vail, also the majority leader, for the conversations that we had. And the senator from Vail did point out that there has been an attempt to respect input from the other side. The first place I see that in the draft Senate regulations for remote participation in Senate floor proceedings. Mr. President, I appreciate that in Section 1, it does say these regulations do not authorize remote participation in committees of reference. That's one of the things that leadership had discussed, and I'm grateful that I don't presume to speak for any of the other three, but my understanding is from the other three members of leadership, the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader of the Senate, and the two minority leaders. Those are the four members of the legislature who have the authority or the responsibility of appointing members to those committees of reference. And it's rather routine between sickness, someone stays home sick or has to watch for a child or a family member who's sick, or you might have a personal business trip. We are part-time citizen legislators. So there's a variety of reasons why members can't be here on a given day. And the four of us can substitute, replace members on those committees of reference. And that was one place where we have agreed as the executive committee, as we've discussed the possibility of remote participation, that I understand that some members, maybe in this chamber, and I hear from the House, very much wanted remote participation for committees of reference, but my understanding from the other three, that there was some level of agreement that it really wasn't necessary, because if a member says he or she does not want to be in that committee of reference, they're concerned about C-19, whatever reason, we can substitute them. So thank you, Mr. President, for making that reference right off the bat. So that means we're talking about here on the floor. And I've also heard from members of the caucus that I'm honored to lead that that's a greater concern. I think that those of us who can substitute members on committees of reference, it was a fairly easy thing for us to recognize that we probably don't need to do that. But that doesn't mean that limiting it just to floor proceedings, second and third reading, is somehow better. I think that all of the points that have been made here are valid. There are 35 of us here, and we are blessed, I suppose, to sit here in this beautiful chamber and to have sort of equal footing. And as I said on the opening day in my speech, there are 35 co-equal members here in this chamber, and we come here to interact with each other on a level playing field. Now, yes, the math of the chamber does something very different. The math, because of the people of Colorado and their votes, grants majority control to one caucus and minority control to the other caucus. And I know, having been in both, that the level of control that is available to us in the minority is significantly less. Mr. President, I am frustrated. I said this earlier when I was at the mic before. We are frustrated. I am frustrated that this proposed rule was presented to us yesterday and is being considered today. I thought that the Rule 34A that discusses to amend, to repeal a rule, and I take that to mean amend or repeal the rules, that we would either have notice of 3 days or 2/3 vote would be required. But we understand that under the temporary rules of the Senate, that this can be done with only 18 votes, a simple majority. So it's frustrating in the minority that we see the rule book, we thought we understood, 2/3, we thought this would be Friday, but now we're being told that no, under the temporary rules that we adopted at the outset of this assembly, that we can actually change the rules to only a simple majority vote. Oh. I asked the President yesterday, and Mr. President, thank you. I don't want to be too contentious here, but thank you. I asked the President yesterday for this. And to his credit, he kind of maybe chuckled a little bit and said, you'll have it in about 15 or 20 minutes. He was already working on this. I don't want to say he did this because I asked him to or demanded it. Thank you, Mr. President. He was on it. And yes, to the senator from Vail, this reflects many of the things that I heard from Majority Leader Garnett to limit. It isn't available for everybody. You'd have to have some sort of criteria. So thank you for that, Mr. President. It isn't that we are insensitive to people who might test positive or might have to self-quarantine. We actually have a member who went through that. And I'm grateful to have my fellow senator from Douglas County with us. I know this affects different people in different ways. We have talked, I think the day we adjourned, I spoke about my concern for the majority leader as the father of a young child. Now I'm no medical expert, but I'm hearing that children may be more able to resist this. It seems to be elderly people that it affects most, but that doesn't mean that my concern is somehow diminished for the majority leader and his child or the good senator from Jefferson County. I have 2 children. They're both healthy. They're both adults now. My younger is about to turn 21. Oh my goodness, how time flies. I think about the senior members of our caucus. One, the good senator from Carbondale, recently pointed out that he is the oldest, and his youth, deceives us a bit. I thought he was younger than that. But those of you who are older, I'm concerned about you. I want to make sure that you feel comfortable doing this job and coming to this building. It's just frustrating that we have this in such a short time frame. It is frustrating that we will use a lower threshold than 2/3 to change the rules that we all rely on. It's frustrating that this has to happen today because it doesn't include committees of reference. And unless the majority leader, maybe, I don't want to make too much of an assumption here, but unless we have significant floor work planned for today, this isn't necessary, and I think we're here. Mr. President, though I am voting no, or will vote no on this resolution, I do want to thank you for this memo. And I want to thank you and the majority leader and the good senator from, let me just say, the majority whip. I want to thank you for the phone calls, the conversation, for hearing the concerns of the minority. And I just respectfully ask, can we wait until Friday? We thought that's what we were going to do. And if not, Mr. President, again, thank you for the memo. Thank you for listening to the concerns of the minority. But I respectfully ask for a no vote on Senate Resolution 5.
Further discussion. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to say thank you for the discussion this morning on this topic. Just a couple of things, and I promise I won't respond to everything that we've discussed. But I do want to say a few things. I agree, I think everybody here agrees, that doing remote participation is not ideal. I don't disagree with the good senator from Douglas County that there are really valuable conversations and discussions that happen informally. that are much more difficult to happen if someone isn't participating on the floor in person. I agree. That's why I frankly love this job. That's why I think it is important that, generally speaking, we always adhere to making sure this is a deliberative process and that we deliberate and that we don't just come in with conclusions and votes already made up all the time. But I will say there is nothing about the situation we are all living in right now that is ideal. People are losing loved ones. We have lost more people to this virus than Americans that died in Vietnam or Korea together. That's incredibly serious. It is heartbreaking to hear about businesses that are losing revenue and not able to open. It is heartbreaking to hear about people that are having struggles getting unemployment. But the alternative is so much worse. And that is why actions have been taken all over the world, not just in Colorado, not just by this governor, to protect people. Because it is very unfortunate and heartbreaking to see a local business suffer. I'm guessing we all agree it's much more heartbreaking for someone to lose a husband or a wife or a child. We've discussed or heard about what previous generations have done and the inherent risk that we all know we take when we take an oath. And I agree with that. Maybe some folks over here might not believe me, but I'm a little old school as well. And I generally sometimes think, yes, we as a people, as a society, have gotten weak in some ways. We want instant gratification. We want to solve everything by a Google search instead of going to college or whatever it would take in the old days to ensure that you can gather knowledge that now you can just get in a moment's notice. But I think we also need to think about the flip side of what previous generations went through. Yes, they may have been a little tougher than us in some ways. They also had very high infant mortality rates. They also died of dysentery. They died of the flu much more often than they do now. And the reason isn't just because we've gotten weak and evolution has made it so we no longer like to suffer. It's because of science. That is why mortality rates for infants and for mothers has dropped. That is why when you get a flu or another virus, you don't think that maybe this is going to be the end. You think you're going to be out for a few days, maybe a week. It's because of science. And I think that is what we should be making our decisions on right now, is science. We've heard people say, I'm not a scientist, but to me that's a beginning of a sentence that says maybe we should listen to the scientists with whatever is about to come next. And the scientists and the health professionals have given us very clear guidance. And that is if you're in a vulnerable risk group, you need to take extra precautions. And that's going to be a little bit different for everyone. Some people are going to push the envelope a little bit more than others, and that's okay. Because in the end, this is largely a personal decision. I have health concerns. I think in some ways I'm in a vulnerable risk group. I think many of us probably are, for reasons that we maybe can't tell just by looking at each other. I'm not going to use remote voting. I don't plan to, at least. I'm going to be here. But that doesn't mean that I should not allow someone else who wants to make that decision for themselves to be able to do it. So I hope as we continue this and as people do utilize this, we don't continue to go down the path that I started to hear this morning, which is comparing each other's health situations and saying, well, I'm a few years older than you, or I had this or I had that, and I'm here, so therefore you have to be here. We don't know everyone's situations. People should be able to make that decision for themselves, for their family, and what frankly, their health professionals that they work with are telling them to do to take care of themselves. Again, I agree this is not ideal, but I do disagree that this has been sprung on folks and it came from left field. We've been talking about this on the mic and with each other since before we adjourned. This has not been something that all of a sudden was news to us yesterday when we came into work. It changed over time. We've reduced the potential uses of remote voting. We've changed what the rights and responsibilities would be for someone who uses remote participation. That was due to conversations. That was due to mock hearings that we did to test out what the kinks might be that we need to fix. That was due to conversations with Democrats, with Republicans, with House members, with Senate members, and with staff. These regulations are a result of all of those conversations, and it's definitely not ideal. For me, for the ones who plan to utilize it, for those who oppose it altogether, it is not ideal. But I hope we keep things in context that we are talking about 2.5 weeks during the most severe global pandemic we have ever seen. This isn't going to be commonplace after this pandemic is over. And in some ways, I think it's a little appealing to say, that's just not how we do things here. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I want to be able to have a conversation with somebody. I totally get that. I am not comfortable with saying, well, we thought about remote participation, but it made people feel a little weird, so we didn't. And then someone gets sick and gets severely ill and is in the hospital, and potentially someone dies or has impacts that impact the rest of their life. That's not a risk that's worth taking, because we just would prefer to have a few conversations on the side of the well for 2 weeks. I'm willing, by all means, to say it's not going to be ideal for 2.5 weeks if that means that one of our members or a family member of theirs is not going to get severely ill. I think that action is worth it, and the risk is too great to not do something. I think in this moment in time, there is a lot of things to be concerned about. There are a lot of things to be problem solving. There are a lot of things, frankly, to argue about. We can argue about if that cafe should have been sanctioned, or if they should be allowed to open, or when stay-at-home orders should be lifted, or how to best get our economy back on its feet and people back to work. Those are the things we should be fighting about and talking about, and hopefully coming to resolution on over these next couple of weeks. This is not going to have an impact on the vast majority of Coloradans. This is not going to help them get back to work sooner. This is not going to help people that are currently on a ventilator in the hospital. Those are the things we need to be spending our time on in this abridged session. And I hope after today that we can get to work, and we'll fight, and we'll discuss, and we'll argue, and we'll amend things, and we'll have conversations to the side. But we should do it in these next couple of weeks knowing that the world is living in a very precarious situation, and it's not going to be ideal, and we have to change a few of the things of how we work. There's plexiglass up. We're all wearing masks. You can probably understand only every other word I say. It's not ideal. But those are the times we are living in, and we have a job to do. And I think we need to let all of us, all 35 of us, do that job in a way that keeps all of us safe for 2.5 weeks. And God willing, everything will get a little bit more back to normal after that. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, everybody, for this discussion. I look forward to continuing the work that we all want to do to help Colorado get back on its feet this year. Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for an aye vote on Senate Resolution 5.
Having no further discussion, the motion is the adoption of Senate Resolution 005. Are there any no votes? Mr. Minority Leader, Senators Crowder, Marble, Hill, Sonnenberg, Heisey, Gardner, Lundin, Scott, Cook, Priola, Rankin, Tate, Woodward, Quorum, Smallwood. With a vote of 19 ayes, 16 no votes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Resolution 005 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Winter, Williams, Danielson, Todd, Hansen, Rodriguez, Fields, Moreno, Gonzalez, Lee, Janal, Pedersen, Story. Please add the President. Consideration of memorials. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the consideration of memorials calendar lay over until Thursday, May 28th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The consideration of memorial calendar will be laid over until Thursday, May 28th. Consideration of governor's appointment consent calendar. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the consideration of governor's appointments consent calendar lay over until Thursday, May 28th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The consideration of governor's appointments consent calendar will be laid over until Thursday, May 28th. Introduction of bills.
Senate Bill 209 by Senators Garcia and Holbert, and Representatives Becker and Neville, concerning bills enacted in the second regular session of the 72nd General Assembly that include an act subject to petition clause.
State Veterans and Military Affairs. Announcements. Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Ag and Natural Resources Committee will meet in 3:57 today following the completion of Senate Education, with probably a quick break in between. I did want to note a change in the order of bills that will be heard. We'll essentially flip Senate Bill 201 and Senate Bill 189, so the order would be 197, 189, 1072, 1191, 121, and then 201, just for the convenience of the sponsors involved. And also, colleagues, I think many of you noticed yesterday that the boards weren't always reflecting the current status, I think because of the speed at which we were moving. So I know a lot of us rely on those boards to tell us when to run up to committee, but perhaps listening in might be a better option today in case the boards don't quite reflect the reality of bills being heard. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I did want to let you all know that the Senate Finance Committee will be meeting this afternoon at 1:30 p.m. Once again, we will be meeting in House Committee Room 0112. And I did want to thank the nonpartisan staff and in particular Ms. Berger for all of her work yesterday to make sure that our committee proceedings were being broadcast via Granicus. And so I do look forward to seeing you all. We do have 2 bills under consideration. I look forward to seeing you all promptly at 1:30. Thank you.
Members, before I forget, I do want to one of the memos was mentioned today, but I do want to remind you that 2 memos were passed out and delivered to you. If you have any questions, feel free to consult with the majority leader or the minority leader. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judiciary Committee is not meeting today.
Senator Foote.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder that the Senate State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee is meeting this afternoon at 1:30 in room 357. Nothing has changed from the calendar that was published, but we will see you there at 1:30.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, we will meet in 15 minutes, and we are meeting on the first floor. We're meeting in room 112. And then also our Capital Development Committee will meet tomorrow at 8 a.m. in Senate room 357.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate recess until 1 p.m. today.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the Senate will stand in a recess until 1300 today.